When you edit files inside the waveform view of the editor panel, you almost always have to do what's called a time range selection, something like that, where you select part of the file and then you can do something to it. You can change the volume, you can apply an effect, you can replace it with something else, several things that can be done with a time range selection. So that's what we're going to talk about in this tutorial. If you want to follow along, just open up these two files, the Gettysburg Unedited and the Four Voices Spread. Gettysburg Unedited is inside Working Files Narrations, and then the Four Voices Spread is inside the demo files right there. So those two guys are open. You can follow along as we do this tutorial. I'm going to work only inside the waveform view of the editor panel. I'm not going to work inside the multitrack session because that's a whole other ball of wax. We're going to talk about multitrack session in several tutorials down the road. And the other two guys, the spectral frequency display and the spectral pitch display, are also two different kinds of animals. And I want to open them up for a second just to show you why that is. Start with the spectral frequency display. Before I open it, look over here to the right. You see this one selection tool, the time selection tool, is active. It's active here inside the waveform display of the editor panel. These other guys are not active. They're grayed out. But when I open up the spectral frequency display, voila, they all become active. That's because these tools work only in the spectral frequency display. These are specialized selection tools, and I'm going to save these for when I talk about how you deal with unwanted noises and also how you can apply some special effects. But briefly, here's the marquee selection tool. It allows you to select a rectangular area within the pitches. Here's a lasso tool that selects an unusually shaped area. The paintbrush tool allows you to make these incredible little paintbrushes that you can apply some effects to for some very cool effects. This last guy is not really a selection tool. It's called the Spot Healing Brush tool, but it is active inside the spectral frequency display. So let's also take a look at the spectral pitch display. Only the time selection tool is active here in the spectral pitch display. And the spectral pitch display is something we really work only with pitch on, so I'm going to save that for another tutorial as well. So let's go back to the waveform view. Just take a look at this, the waveform view of the editor panel, to make some selections. Now, when you make a selection, it's very simple. When you bring your cursor inside the waveform display, you'll see that it turns into the I-beam. It's a context-sensitive cursor here in Adobe Audition. If you move it out of that window, then you see that it changes into a selection tool. So inside here, it becomes an I-beam, which is basically all you need inside the waveform view. Now I just click and drag, and I've made a selection. How simple is that? If I want to expand the selection, I can hover my cursor over the edges. It turns into a little double arrow, and I can drag it, expand it, or drag it this way and expand it, or contract it. If I want to move it, I can hover my cursor up inside it. Notice that it'll turn into a hand now because of this little handle here, those little four parallel lines. When you see those guys, that says you can grab it. That's a little grabber. You can slide this guy around like that. If you want to expand the view of your selection using a keyboard shortcut, you can move your cursor exactly where you want to expand to, hold down the Shift key, and then click. And that expands it that way. To the left, hold on the Shift key and click. That's another fast way to expand it. If you want to shrink it in there, want to narrow it down a bit, put your cursor somewhere inside it, wherever you want to go to. If I hold down the Shift key and click, that'll bring it in. Hold down the Shift key over here and click, it'll bring it in. How does Audition know to bring it in from the left or in from the right? It just depends on where your cursor is relative to the sides. If it's a little bit to the right, a little bit to the left, then it knows which direction to come from. A little bit left, it'll come in from the left. A little bit to the right, it'll come in from the right. Now, frequently you need to zoom in on the file to make a really precise selection. Right now we're zoomed all the way out. You can tell we're zoomed all the way out by looking at the zoom navigator up here in the top. The little right-hand side, the little yellow bar on the right-hand side, and the little yellow bar on the left-hand side are zoomed all the way out. So we're zoomed all the way out on this file. If I want to zoom in, I can grab this bar and start moving in, and we're going to zoom in like so. Once we zoom in, we can use the handle here and slide this zoom navigator around. I can zoom in further on the right-hand side here. Just keep on going in and in and in. All right. Another way to zoom in is to right-click here in the time ruler. Right-click and drag. So I'm going to right-click and drag, and that will zoom in on that time region. That left-hand side of that yellow marker to the right-hand side of that yellow marker. It'll zoom in and fill the screen with that much time. Way in like that. If I want to, let's say, move now, I can move my view here using that little zoom navigator, or I can also hover my cursor on the time ruler. Notice now it turns into a hand. When you're zoomed in, You're going to get a hand when you zoom or move to the top of the time ruler. You can drag the time ruler left and right like that as well. So when you want to zoom in to make a selection, that's how you do it. You zoom in using this tool up here or right-clicking and dragging. And now I can make a precise time segment selection just by dragging right there, for example, if I want to do that. Once you're zoomed in, you can select the area that you can see, the visible area here, by double-clicking. That zooms only the visible area. Notice that you can see it up here in the Zoom Navigator. If I move it off to the side, you'll see that it's not selected over here. If you want to select the entire file, triple-click, 1, 2, 3, and you get the whole file selected, and you can see it up there in the Zoom Navigator as well. If you want to zoom back out to see the whole file again, there's a keyboard shortcut for that. It's the backslash key. The backslash key is above the enter or the return key on the keyboard. Just press that, and you zoom all the way back out again. And if you want to deselect the selection, just click again, and that deselects it. So one more thing now, I want to talk about what you do with a stereo file. So I'm going to switch over to the 4 Voices Spread stereo file. And there it is. And there are 2 channels there. And if I hover my cursor toward the top, you see a little L appear because this is the left channel. I'll hover toward the bottom, you see an R appear. That's the right channel. And that's because I set that in Preferences. If I go to Edit Preferences or Adobe Audition Preferences and go to General, it says Allow Context-Sensitive Channel Editing. I'm going to turn that off for a second, go back to the default. Now if I want to edit one of these channels, you'll notice that I don't get that L or that R when I hover there. I need to turn off one of the channels. If I turn off the right channel, I can edit the left channel. If I turn off the left channel and turn on the right channel, I can edit the right channel. But I prefer using that context-sensitive approach, so I'll go back to that. Edit Preferences and go back here in General and switch that guy back on. Now something kind of interesting happens. I get to hover here and select just the left, or hover here and select just the right. When I go up, it selects both. But if I turn off the left channel, for example, I'll start working down here. If I slide up a bit, it turns it back on again. So this little button becomes kind of superfluous when you have the context-sensitive channel editing turned on. So that wraps up our discussion of making selections inside the waveform view of the editor panel. As to what you do with these selections, what kind of edits you make with them, I talk about that in several upcoming tutorials. And there is one more feature I want to talk about, a feature that helps you make better selections. That feature is called snapping, and I explain snapping in the next tutorial.